is on.
I mean, the presentation, they have no.
We have the little monitor here, which I think we can probably minimize. Just wonder if there's a better resolution for the screen, but I guess it just doesn't really matter, right?
If you're curious, this is how it looks. So like, yeah. So he showed me like I haven't shown them this today. I thought having this look.
Okay, cool. So there's a.
He's like, you can't see it. I just want you to
adjust the camera a little bit.
like, it was really fun.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Site
It's my favorite.
Did anyone move this on purpose?
Creative director.
Yes.
Partition?
I put that up because it was kind of still covering this board, and it seemed like you guys wanted that out.
Well, we might just need to remove it.
Okay.
You do it, yeah.
Do you expect a lot more? Yeah, I don't.
Yeah.
I really don't.
Having access to the table.
Okay.
And it's just, yeah, we'll just slide it back over there.
I was going to ask you. Like, is it weird if I asked her like that? Actually, I love it. It's destroying stuff.
Yep. Sure. Yeah, just one per person.
Yeah. So my friend got another. He got a hurricane.
All right. Hi, everybody on the phone. We'll get started in just another minute or so.
Sounds good. Oh, yeah, I can mute that too.
You can mute people. All right. Don't misbehave, people online, or else Ashley Pace will mute you, and it will cease to be open government. Sit down.
Take away your open government privilege.
I think we're two of them. I mean.
I'm gonna go really fast. I feel like the incentive here would be that no one types
Yes.
it.
Do you want that camera pointed at the audience?
Doesn't,
not using the camera on top of
I am using it, but it's fine. Okay. Should we jump in? Let's get going. All right, we're really excited. We're really excited about this. And for those that are joining virtually, hopefully you're able to hear us. If you can't hear us, or if you have a question or a comment or anything, please pipe up and let us know, and we can move things around to accommodate you. So this is a research share out and discussion of next steps for one of our open government partnership commitments around building a project tracking interface. And we're really excited. We're going to talk through a couple of different things. Basically, the universe of people that we've invited for this are research participants that we've been engaged with throughout the process. So that includes a lot of city employees, as well as some members of the public that we've talked to throughout the process. And so in the spirit of open government, they're here too. And folks, colleagues from the Tech Stack project. For those that aren't familiar with what that project is, there's a team that's working between a couple of different departments to identify the right technology infrastructure to underlie digital services at the city. And so this project is closely related and shares some staff as well. So I'm Daniel. Mateo and Sarah and I have been the core team working on this, but obviously with a lot of help and input from key people around. So thank you all for being here. So the agenda for today, we're going to talk about basically past, present, and future. So where we've been, do a super brief overview of what this project is and what we've been aiming to achieve, and talk about what our research process and findings have been so far, and then where we're at now, which is designing and building a first iteration and minimum viable product of a project tracking interface. And then we're going to talk about where we're going, and we're going to ask everyone that's joining us to help us identify what types of challenges might be coming down the road that we need to address. And so throughout the session, those that are here in the room have a pad of sticky notes and a Sharpie. Throughout the session, your mind might go to, oh, well, there's a certain challenge. We're going to have to figure out what this thing, or, ooh, this is going to be, prickly. We need to figure this out. Or here's an opportunity or a connection point. As we're talking, capture those. One idea per sticky note. We're going to use them at the end, and you guys are going to help us build the roadmap for what this thing is going to be.
And for the people that are on Blue Jeans?
Yeah, so for the people that are joining virtually, we want to follow up with you. So you can call it out, and we can, like somebody here can capture on a sticky note, so we can capture what you want to offer to the conversation. We can also follow up afterward. Unfortunately, we don't have a very good way of facilitating that right now. What we will make sure.
Well, there's a chat function too, so if they want to post things there,
Cool.
Yeah.
So use the chat function.
Yep.
Or if something occurs to you, and this goes for people in the room and online, if something occurs to you afterward, feel free to just follow up with us, and we'll include that. After the meeting today, we'll grab photos of everything and share it around with everybody. So don't worry for documentation. Any questions so far? So where we are, we're going to come back to this a couple of different times, but we've concluded an initial research phase that was purposefully pretty small, and we're getting into the designing and building of a first iteration of the tool. And we'll talk about a couple, like where exactly we're going from here, but that's to give you a sense of what are we about to hear. Thanks for coming, Jonathan. If you don't mind, grab a pad of sticky notes and a Sharpie over there too. All right, so we're going to talk briefly about where we've been in the research findings. Super quick project overview. So some of you might know that the City of Austin is a member of the subnational pilot of the Open Government Partnership, and that's a lot of words. And what it basically means is there is a group, an international group that that nation states belong to that make certain commitments to transparency and civic participation and those kinds of things. And they make commitments and they create plans on how to do that, and there's an organization that provides resources for that. They're prototyping this at basically the city and state level. Internationally, we are the lone U.S. city to be a part of that. And so as part of that, we've made certain commitments, and we issued these commitments back in December of last year. I won't go into detail on all of these, although you can dive in to the deep end if you want to at opengovpartnership.bluefire.com. The topic of today's conversation is number 5, creating an online project tracker. So why is this a commitment? So one of the city does a lot of project tracking in a lot of different places right now. One kind of moment in time in the process of coming up with this commitment was at the 2016 ATX Hack for Change. There was a team that worked on our open government partnership commitments, and they said, wouldn't it be cool if we had a way to actually show what we've committed to and what our progress is on tracking those things? And then from there it went, well, what if we could just do that for city projects in general? And so they came up with a mock-up there. And so that was an important inspiration for what we're doing. And so with that inspiration, we've looked at a couple of other project tracking examples internationally. The gov.uk, the government digital services there, had a tracker for a lot of its digital services projects that showed, here's where these different projects are to build different digital services, Discovery, Alpha, Beta, Live, very tech focused. The government of Mexico created one for their own open government partnership commitments that looked at what different commitments they made and where were they in the different milestones. Ontario, Canada created one that looked at their commitments on a scale of like planning to completion, so kind of an implementation timeline. So this is being done. This is not necessarily a new thing. Welcome. Lim, if you don't mind grabbing a pad of sticky notes and a Sharpie. And so you look at these international examples and you think, whoa, hold on a second. We do that here, right? Yeah, we do. So there's the Civic Map Viewer. This has been around, I don't know how long. A couple years, 3 years, 4 years. So looking at this gets information from a particular city database on capital improvement projects. More recently, there was a capital project Explorer that was launched for all of the projects funded through the 2016 mobility bond. And so, like, as just serendipity, like this hit like right after we started doing our work, which is awesome. And so this maps out different transportation and mobility projects that are going on throughout the city. And so we realize the city of Austin is doing that kind of project tracking in a lot of different places right now. The origin of this commitment was to say, what if we could take that type of discipline and expand it across departments? Because what we tend to do right now is track projects by department. But what we know, and what we'll talk a little bit more about that we found in the research, is that for the most part, people in Austin don't identify with departments. They don't know that a sidewalk is being put down by transportation or by public works, or that a road construction project is Pat Metro or TxDOT or the city. They don't know. And so what we've been playing with is basically, what if we could have something that spans those organizational boundaries that seem to not be as meaningful to people outside the city? So we had this open government project tracking commitment here. What are our goals? They revolve around awareness and engagement. Awareness, so we want an increased level of knowledge and access to city project information for both city staff and for both the community and for city staff. Because another thing that we really know is the city staff want this information. They want to be able to make connections across departments too, just like community members do. Beyond that, and perhaps in the longer term, it's about engagement. We don't want to provide information for information's sake. We want to provide information for the ability for people to participate in projects or find out how they can get involved in whatever shape that might take. So to elaborate a little bit on where we're at right now, because this is an open government partnership commitment, there's an assessment process that comes with this. And Raymond Want, who I think is on virtually, is the OGP's appointed independent researcher who's going to be tracking and evaluating the city's progress on our open government commitments. And so there's a process that he's going to be undertaking to research and assess our progress, and then there will be a draft report due at the end of December. So we're kind of gauging things on that process, but realizing at the same time, doing project tracking and figuring it out here in Austin is an important thing for us beyond just any sort of individual commitment. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Sarah Smith to talk about the research process.
Thanks. So we identified two primary audiences we wanted to learn from for this project. Project information consumers and project information producers. And since we had limited time for this project, we focused on the consumers that are most engaged with the city already. And then the producers are people that manage projects and provide project updates. So what do we want to learn? Well, from the producers, we wanted to learn about what project tracking management practices already exist at the city and across departments, and what information departments need to share. And for consumers, what do they want to know about city projects? And how people want to interact with project information online, and then the user experience of existing open government project tracking tools, the ones that Daniel spoke about earlier. So we started with desk research. We identified some of the project tracking tools that exist already at the city. What we discovered is that there's actually a lot of different project tracking tools out there, and they're tracking different data, and not just across the city, but across departments, like within the departments, they're reporting different information. And they're sharing this information in different formats, narrative, data tables, or maps. We also conducted city staff group interviews. So we spoke with different 16 departments, I think, across the city, and we spoke to both information consumers and producers. We also held one-on-one interviews with community liaisons. We spoke to people from the ATX Hack for Change, the Community Tech and Telecom Commission, Leadership Austin, and Open Austin. We interviewed 8 people. And during those interviews, we had people test those 3 existing open government project tracking tools and ask them to walk us through their experience using them. For this example in Ontario, people pointed out that they really like the dashboard look here. They like being able to see how many projects are in each stage. But the category part, they thought was really confusing. They're like, every project is a government category. What's the point of that? And then with Mexico, these green boxes were really confusing to people. They were not intuitive. They're like,
Tetris.
Right.
Yes.
Is this a project stage? Like, why are they all the same color? And also the numbering for the projects, they're like, does this have meaning? Like, are these prioritized somehow? Or is it just some random order they were thrown in? So this is UK's site. Once you dive into an actual project, people really like that it shows what department is responsible for that project. And they really like how it shows who the project leader is. A single point of contact, right?
Yeah.
And they really like the different stages and showing when the project completed each stage. And this video here, people had mixed feelings about it. Some people liked them. Some people thought that they shouldn't be at the top of the page. They should be like further down. It wasn't super high priority. And so after all those interviews and desk research, we wrote down all the data points we collected on sticky notes. And we started organizing, here they are. We started organizing the sticky notes across the boards into themes. So we started making connections between all the things we started to hear from city staff and community members. So here we are, moving them. So what did we learn? Well, for community members, what we learned is that they do think local government matters, and they see the city as a primary source for information. But the website and the system is super confusing. Like, this is how they see us. All of these crazy lines. Like Daniel mentioned, if the street's being torn up in Austin, people don't think, oh, that's Public Works. Because really, it could be Public Works, ATD, it could be TxDOT or Cap Metro. They don't see the city or city projects in terms of departments. So because things are so confusing, they rely on other sources like social media or civic groups. And they want a single point of contact, just like Ontario or the UK showed. Someone that's a trusted source on an issue. City staff, so we learned that practices vary across teams and departments. Enterprise project management tools are not working for people. And so they rely on cloud-based tools such as Trello or Google Docs. They want to be able to use project information to better tell their story, but because they struggle, they're not able to very well. And they have to rely on institutional knowledge and meetings to know what's going on with other people's projects. And so they also, like the public, want a single contact to learn about project stuff. What we also learned from city staff is that there's a lack of data standards and consistency. There's lack of interoperability. We have tons of systems, but none of them can talk to one another. There's lack of guidance on what tools to use and how to use them. So for those, an example is in one of our interviews, people were talking about using Google Docs to collaborate and share project information. They're like, we don't even know if we're supposed to be doing this. Like, DTM, like, would we get in trouble? But because the other project tools aren't working for them, they do it in secrecy. There's a fear around sharing too much information or sharing it too soon. They don't want people to get too excited about projects that may never happen. There's a reactive culture and no time to proactively tell one's story. So city council, city leadership, they're coming to people asking for project information last minute. And so they're just constantly trying to react and get that done instead of spending the time that they should be taking to do it.
I have a question. Did you
Yeah.
see a prevalence of using percentages to describe where you are in projects, like 80% done?
No, I don't remember that coming up.
Maybe it's a good thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's like it was interesting because there are way different kind of systems and practices regarding project management, project tracking that are going on. And in some places it's super sophisticated with like Microsoft project cascading, tasks and all this kind of stuff, in which case they are talking in percentage terms. But in a lot of places it's much more informal and it's about we're doing this or we're not doing this or this is complete. Yeah. It's a complexity that
So we took all of that research we did and we created user stories out of them to document the requirements for a project tracking tool. So we use the format as a user persona. I need a way to do an action so that I can accomplish a goal. And so we have them all documented here in Airtable. We have 108 user stories. And then we categorize them into bins. So here you see the different buckets that are going to inform the project tracking tool features. So now Mateo is going to take over and talk about the design and build.
Cool. So everything you've heard up to now is kind of informs where we are right now. And what I'm going to talk a little bit about is what we're designing and how we're thinking about building it. Some of the research we've done about choosing a platform, which kind of, if you were here for the presentation before this, there's a lot of similarities in terms of where we are and where the content web flow project is. We're trying to swim in parallel, but also use the right tool for the right job. So let me actually go back. So one thing I want to point out right off the bat is version 1.0. We totally anticipate that we're going to be iterating and improve this over time. So what we're focusing on now is just what's the requirements right now, kind of the easiest things. So looking back, Daniel showed this earlier, but there's a few things added here. Our timeline for building, testing for this first iteration, and then how do we expand and refine and continue testing. So the 5 components that are really important off the bat are giving that person an overview of all the projects that we have in our catalog, and then being able to click on one and get some more details about it. 2 is being able to browse through projects based on what matters to you, whether that's departments or the high-level city goals. Maybe we'll identify more categories that we want to focus on as we go along and as we test things. A really important thing is this kind of standardized set of fields of what's important. What are the attributes that all projects need to have or at least consider? And like all this data gets collected in different systems. For us to be able to eventually think about bringing that data in from all these other places, we need to have a good set of defined data around the scheme of what a project is. And then as we've gone through research, we kind of thought maybe this could be a pretty plain static site that wouldn't take a lot of content, especially if we had integration built in. But the more we thought about it and the more we looked back at our research, we realized that we really need a CMS for this to be something that people can adopt and own over time. So this is where this admin interface and experience for city staff is. And then this last component, which is really going to come through more in testing as well, is plain language, understandable content for city staff and then also for external users. Any questions about why are we kind of focusing on these components? Cool. Okay, so this is kind of nitty-gritty details. And the main thing I want to point out here is we have these high priority things we've identified for the MVP that we know we need to focus on. And then we have this backlog of other features of a project, other data fields that are a little more complex. And we need to think about what's the right way to implement them. And they might vary from department to department or what have you. So these are things that we know are important and we want to get to, but we're going to focus on these first and incorporate these as we can over the course of this kind of first version 1. So just kind of going through these important things. And a lot of it is what you've already seen on Ontario and Mexico's pages. A summary description of the project, link to more information, the stage that it's in, budget and funding, department lead, partner organizations, contact person, contact email, related city goals, and the date that the content is last day. So that's kind of the things we're focusing on for now. And then kind of taking a step back, not just thinking about projects, but what are the other objects or entities that matter when you're thinking about projects? So the project being one, but then the city goals. How do we input new city goals over time whenever we have new councils that come and have their own priorities? Departments we know is going to be an important thing to follow and kind of have relationships built in between departments and projects. And then external organizations, partner organizations. A lot of projects in the city have external stakeholders. For example, the OGP commitment has a whole list of civil society partners. How can we do a better job of, when we're looking at projects, share what community organizations, nonprofits are also working on this? Because that's often another front door to getting involved. And then maybe even thinking about a future where organizations that we work with or organizations we trust could add their own projects as long as they're working towards city goals as well. Any questions about this? You look like you have a question.
No, I think it's great.
There's the strategic planning initiative. Could that potentially be an opportunity to beta test some of this? Are you familiar with that initiative? Strategic planning.
That's the taxonomy that we're thinking of for the city goals. Is the using their the 6 outcome areas.
Yeah, we have more zone of control over all the projects that fellows are taking on, so we can force them. So that's a good way to beta test. But if you feel like the outcome teams would actually provide the data,
I mean, I'm on one of the teams, and I think that might be. It's worth reaching out to.
okay,
Cool.
That's great.
Will you write that down so we don't lose that? Cool. It's a good thing to write on sticky notes. Okay, and this is more a spreadsheet. The thing I wanted to kind of point out here is especially Diana, who's putting this together and got our feedback. One thing that we're trying to be really deliberate about is these are all the different attributes of a project or a city goal. And we also need to think about could there be several instances of a field? So for example, a project could be in different stages at different times. So we need to think about how, in this kind of schema of what attributes each of these entities have, how do we let people change them over time? Is it a text, an image, they pick from a list, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, and so then this is the first early mock-up, the kind of first prototype. And it takes a lot of inspirations from what you've seen before. There's other, I guess, state and national level, province level governments that have done this before us. But it takes a lot of cues from what they've done, and also takes cues from our research. Yeah, so Diana's mocked this up for a mobile screen as well. We didn't include that because it's already hard enough to see this. And maybe there's some things I should point out. So basically, you have a summary here. You have that last updated field. There could be like a picture that represents the project, the milestones. This is really where like a stage would go as well. Funding sources, who's involved. So this is the project tracking tool project, which Daniel is the person to get in touch with. And then down here, you could see more information about what other projects the Innovation Office is working on. And if there's other projects that have similar goals, maybe you want to advocate for those. This is kind of the basic template we're thinking through.
Like that bottom right hand corner might be where it's tracked.
Yeah. Okay, so that's kind of the overview of the design and what we're thinking about. But an important decision, and kind of Ben started to allude to this, is what projects can we throw in here? There's a ton of projects in the city. We don't have a full inventory of what those are. We can't expect everyone to be on board from day one and editing things, and especially for things that are going to be visible to the public. So what's our zone of control here? What can we add? So first, we're looking at Innovation Office projects, obviously, and CTM projects that we're working closely on. I think TAR has been mentioned here as well. That's easy. Kind of fortunately, with all the smart city research and that initiative that's been going on, we recently asked, I guess it was in a Google form or an Airtable form, all the departments that are working on smart city to let us know what they're working on. And we asked them a bunch of questions like, what stage is your project in? How does it align with council priorities? Who's the contact person? They kind of unknowingly kind of tricked them into giving all this information we need to throw it into the project tracking tool. So that's where we're going to start, and we're gonna reach out to these departments and invite them to edit the content and keep it up to date over time. But this is kind of the initial set of projects. From inside the city to edit the content. Like what will the website domain be, or?
Are you imagining this being part of our homepage? Are you imagining a whole different way to find it? Like not everyone goes to the homepage to find out.
Yeah, I don't know, Daniel. Do you have a?
Can you write that down on a sticky?
Cool.
So you mentioned, I guess, in part of the research, or Sarah mentioned, the countless number of systems that departments use to track. Will the data that we have in our tracking system be imported from those systems, or will it be a secondary kind of duplication of content that we put elsewhere? I think that's going to be a big challenge.
Yeah, you should write that one down too.
I will.
Yeah, to start answering that question, but this is definitely one we anticipated discussing more of. To kind of meet the goal of the OGP deadline, we decided not to try to tackle any type of heavy integrations. The way I think about it is once we have something that we can show off and sell to folks, I think it'll be easier to find people that are wanting to get involved. And then thinking about each project tracking tool, and even within each tool, there'll probably be different translations we'll have to write to do those imports. focusing on the ones that are most interested in including their projects on here seemed like the easiest way to tackle those over time.
It's another thing to be like tracking projects that kind of get born somewhere, whether it's the community or inside, that actually kind of travel this life cycle through various systems of the city, whether it's the agenda management system, to say like this is happening on the council agenda, to the proprietary system the department might use,
right,
to public meetings, whatever it may be. But there was always an issue of like, how do you find that project? Like, is there a unique ID that somehow can exist for that project through its life cycle? And I don't think that was anything that we ever came close to trying to solve. I'll write it down.
Yeah.
You're saying coming up with like a barcode system, like in my mind, right? Like so that you can always, it's like a card catalog. So
basically, yeah.
Smart way.
Because often, because there are so many different systems, you might have several IDs for the same project.
Yep.
That, again, trying to unify the W across system, so that if you try to put together in a single place, it would be very challenging. Again, what will be the ID that's common for all of those?
Yeah. The ID system could also help with realizing where there's project redundancies.
Right. Yeah.
Just because like if you name projects off the subject matter, you get a ton of variations of community and engagement and initiative. Like there's the same words in different orders, and you're not sure are these the same thing or are they different?
I'll also add that in like analogous areas, industry areas like this, especially when multiple organizations are trying to tackle a similar problem in the private industry, the consumer or the person viewing tends to drive the preference ID. So like yeah, if you think you try to call something else and people constantly call it this other thing, and you're like, okay, obviously like we should tell them that. So I wonder like how if in usability testing you'll see you can test those some sort of reference labeling and see what people respond to.
All good stuff.
Have we captured, real quick, have we captured those on sticky notes? Because this is really great. Okay, thank you.
Go ahead.
How easy it is.
From the peanut gallery, if we could repeat people's questions,
Okay.
like to the microphone. I'm typing them, but
Okay, cool. I'll do that going forward. All right, so this is the list. And so what are our next steps? One is CMS selection. This is kind of going back towards where things align with the content webflow projects team. That team has narrowed down their list of CMSs to 3. And the one that we're most excited about, but still has a lot of testing to be proven out, is Netlify. So we saw this as a good opportunity to kind of bang on it a little more and see how well it would stand up with multiple content editors. The reason we like it is because it, kind of going technical for a second, is because it doesn't require you to run a server to keep it up. It generates static files, so it works based off of static site generators. You can interchange whichever one you want. Jekyll is the one we've used on a lot of other projects here in the city with some kind of layer on top of them. And then it has just a lot of built-in CMS capabilities, and it's built using React, which is a component-based architecture, which makes it really easy to extend. And we also think that it will be, if we chose to work with this kind of system in the future, it would be easier to attract talent that's interested in working on this type of software projects. So that's kind of the justification why we're trying Netlify for this specific project. The other work that we're working on next is continue wireframing, starting to code this week, basically. We're going to iterate on the data schema that we showed you as some of these discussions flesh out, importing the data on the projects and the list we showed you, and then testing both the admin portal to see how well it works with some of the requirements that have been identified in the web content. Content workflow project. Yeah. What's going to make that a good experience for content editors is something they've already done a lot of research around, so we're going to kind of lean on that research, and then testing the front end, the kind of what consumers see without any admin privileges. to make sure the data that we're presenting, or the content we're presenting, makes sense to them. Yeah, Lim.
You've already identified, I guess, kind of the quote-unquote MVP projects. So for these next steps, you have September and October. Just in my mind, I'm thinking, is this in the order in which you plan on testing these and having these planned and developed in September and October, or you're just going to kind of pick and choose from one of the 7 in which you can complete in September and in October?
Okay, so I'm gonna repeat Lem's question the way I understood it. So he's asking, these are ranked 1 through 7. Is that ranking intentional? Are we going to go through those in order? Are we going to kind of pick and choose through the 2 months we've identified here? These are mostly in order. We're selecting the CMS right now. Once Diana gets back from vacation, she's going to continue wireframing. The 2 and 3 are going to happen a lot simultaneously, and we're going to get a lot of things set up. I guess 2, 3, and 4 will be happening mostly around the same time. Actually, 4 could jump down here with user testing. So yeah, the order is supposed to be like a little bit guiding here, but it's pretty flexible, and we might come back to iterating on data schema based on what we learned from testing. But we do plan to get all these hit through by the end of October. Mm-hmm.
And I think I chatted with her quickly about this, and she was like, "Oh, it seems like it would make sense to have a content type that was the project tracker page that you just showed."
Mm-hmm.
So it'd be cool to get you guys together to add that to the content model. And Diana's been her mentor, so they've been working together on it.
Awesome.
It's like a natural.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you. So yeah, so Celine just brought up that there's even more work in parallel between her team, especially around the content model for the ATX or atx.gov website and where this fits into that content model. Cool. Yeah. Cool. So you've sat through 2 of the 3 sections, and this one's a little more interactive. So hand it back to Daniel.
So as we've been going, we've been asking everyone to capture on sticky notes any challenges, opportunities, barriers, concerns, but positive stuff, but also like, oh, this is going to be fun. You're going to have to figure this out as we go. So let's take maybe like 3 minutes, just digesting everything that we've talked about so far. Write down a couple of thoughts, challenges or opportunities, or anywhere in between, that this project will have to face down at some point in the future. Could be now, maybe it's a year from now. And the folks that are joining virtually,
I told them to write them here in the chat, and I'll write them down for the room.
Awesome. Okay, so Ashley told y'all joining virtually to put them in the chat, and she'll capture in the room, and we will share them that way.
You want us to label them challenge, barrier, concern?
No, just no way. Yeah, or no need to label. It could be a question. It could be a statement, or just a statement of a barrier. Is someone trying to talk right now online? If so, the audio is really, really garbled.
There's two microphones unmuted probably.
How mysterious.
Where is it?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, this is Patrick Twick. I'm with the police department, and I would throw it in the chat, but I'm actually not next to my computer right now. But I did want to chime in on a bit of a concern that I had. It looks like that you guys are pretty focused on efforts around aligning the projects underneath the city's strategic framework in some way, and I think that's great, but I think it's equally important to capture the measurement process in there as well, the performance measurement process. I don't know if that's already been discussed or that's something that's planned out for the future, but, in my view, I think that you can't measure if you're successful, right? I'm speaking as a city, you can't measure if you're successful without performance measurement. So I think tracking the projects is great, and I'm a project manager and I get that, but I'm just hoping that the measurement process doesn't get left out in some way in all of this, in the alignment, in the effort to align all of this under the strategic goals of the city. So that's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you, Patrick. So it sounds like are you talking about measuring performance of individual projects? Or are you talking about like the performance measures that align to those overall strategies?
No, not to the specific projects. I just see performance measurement as that's the only way to monitor results and outcomes. And whereas I think projects line up underneath the measurement process, the performance process, to decide, okay, here to let the public know, okay, here are the projects and initiatives that we are working on as a city to impact and influence these set of high-level performance measures. And I'm not sure if those performance measures exist at a citywide level, at a corporate level. But I would think that, you can't measure success in a city with just on projects alone.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point. Ashley captured that. Thank you, Patrick.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. So let's who's got one they want to share, and what I can do is just come around and grab them, and we'll put them up on the Blackboard here. For those that are joining virtually, we'll repeat the challenges as we grab them, put them up on the board, and then we'll take photos of everything and share them around afterward. And then at the same time, I think Mateo and/or Sarah are gonna just try to capture a couple of notes from this part, and I'll display that on the screen share. Okay. So who's got one they want to share? Right?
They're going to go together. I've got a too rigid / freeform data model.
So we've got too rigid / freeform data model.
And that could lead to stale data where either people aren't able to communicate what they're trying to communicate about the project due to the data model and then stop entering data because it's just not useful, or it's
bingo challenge. I'll say stale data was my concern as well.
You move the microphone out a little. Maybe folks can hear. Good idea. Okay, so we've got two comments on the challenge of having stale data, ensuring project owners keep the information updated. Do we have any other bingos on that one?
I think you guys probably already knew that, right? Like that's we're doing this first round, and then we have to figure out how we integrate. So I don't.
Well,
unknown.
That was also one of the questions of like early on. We thought, well, I mean, is this a pretty just rigid thing that we could intake all the project information just via Google form or something, and it's a one-time thing? It's like, well, the need to update things over time. There's governance around that, like what's the process and what's going to be available. And that really seemed to be the, kind of the decision maker on a CMS versus just a form entry.
Yeah.
What else?
Sorry, I didn't realize we were putting anything down.
Oh, cool. You want me to go ahead and take these? Okay, so we've got one that's whom in the city, who or whom in the city will be the liaison for the internal and external.
That was mine.
Yeah. Do you want to say some more about it?
Yeah. Just kind of thinking about just someone who's not internal. Well, I guess two-pronged approach, because I mentioned internal and external. So with the internal piece, it appears that it's going to be a task in itself to convince departments to give you data, aggregate data. So that's kind of the first piece. Like who's going to be that spokesperson to help articulate that. I think once you start getting past two individuals, then information kind of gets diluted. So whoever can speak to the overall project itself, that'd be great internally. And then now when you start looking at it from an external perspective, how can you convey the message to citizens so that they understand exactly what you're doing and how you're doing it, so it doesn't look like that diagram where it's just mush everywhere.
Yeah, so if I can paraphrase back, there's a challenge around finding out who the liaison or who the point of contact is going to be within the project to get the truest information on the project. And then also, I think there was a piece in there around making sure that this is going to be understandable to people that are outside. And does that kind of bring up ideas of jargon and
absolutely
understandability and stuff?
It's I guess it kind of relates back to the comment what was made earlier about internally you can say one thing and everybody understands it, but if externally they're using a different language or a different terminology, then it's like, okay, we may not be making ourselves very clear.
Yeah. Great point.
People-oriented language.
People-oriented language.
That's another part of our workflow project. I wonder how we can use this as an opportunity.
It's just a shame that we're not working together. We're not co-located or anything like that.
I have a question. So you talk about on the page that you guys will have like the point of contact, and just thinking about, I've never been the point of contact. Very new to government, so I don't really know how this would work. But like at a private company, that would be a link to like some kind of customer service or something, so you're not having one person like getting deluged by this point of contact information. And I imagine that is probably a scenario that will come up with some of these that are bigger and more publicized. So is that something, like for me, that was a concern, is what the people not wanting to be the contact directly, or how that would end up inundating them and end up becoming a pain in the butt for them, and them not wanting to be part of the project tracking in the end because of it.
So who wants to raise their hand to have their name on this website?
Yeah. So like obviously we're getting paid to be like our public, but just like what did that look like? Or for instance, like that person that is that contact, make sure they have the payment template.
Yeah.
Because that is also a skill set. So whether it's the person in charge of the project, should they be the ones actually talking to the public? Do they have like that really great skill set of talking to people? Or they manage the project because they're good at managing projects? It's like a different skill.
So it's like the need to like intake like
what does that
questions and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And I think that's interesting because on the capital project tracker, there's they've listed individual people with email addresses also. And so I think this is about like 2-3 months old now, and we had invited Allie and Zach and Sarah to this, but we're starting to talk with them because I think there's a lot that we can learn also. Like, I don't know, maybe they have, they might have, some lessons learned. For example, like you click on one of these and you get, some information on it. And then there's Carolyn Perez Austin, Texas.
And whenever they presented this, they said that was one thing they pointed to that was really important.
Yeah.
They're putting this together.
Yeah.
I think it's clear, like, there's people that want that point of contact, but I think it's really important for us to think about how do we not make that awful experience for the city staff.
For sure. Did you
Yes.
get to that one? Okay, I think that's awesome. Did anybody else have a comment on that? Or
Yeah, kind of related was a comment that we got from Raymond about having not just that email, but a tool for people to add questions or comments that can be visible.
Yeah.
Platform. Point of integration there.
Yeah.
Along the lines of kind of the feedback form, and I don't know if this is something that lends itself to it, but we do hear a lot of rumors from the community, and we need kind of a platform in which to kind of answer those, or maybe set that straight as far as the messaging of what we've heard, and that way it doesn't kind of spiral out of control on social media, and then we're caught catching it on the back end instead of proactively addressing the community's concerns.
Interesting.
One of the ways to manage a person getting inundated is to have sort of an institutional email address that they have access to. And then that can also be handed down to people who succeed them, because people will email Carolyn forever, long after she leaves that position, because they have her name. And so it's helpful to have something that stays with the project.
Do we have that? Have you captured that, Sabina? So for those that didn't hear, is one way that Sabina offered around that is to have some sort of like institutional or distribution list kind of email address that's not unique to one person but can be shared. I think it'll be interesting to test that out because there was a clear finding around people wanting a single human that they could contact.
Well, I'm not saying take down the name.
No, yeah, but like there might be ways to nuance it such that like when we would have people talk out loud and walk through the other project tracking tools, there were some things that were like info at government.gov or whatever, or no reply at these, and they were like, well, I'm clearly not going to email that thing. But there might, like, one thing would be, there might be something that's in the middle. Maybe it's the project name or some sort of team at austintexas.gov or something that's identifiable enough.
Probably going to be a case by case basis.
Yeah.
And project, yeah.
So
we need an all.
But I do think that an interesting point that Sabina brought up is the loss of knowledge if we do have it going to individuals. Like, if there's feedback on these projects, that if it is going to individual people and not being tracked in a bigger way, as far as like what are the comments that are people getting? Is there a trend in the kind of comments that we're getting? And is that being maintained over time to understand how that changes? If it's going to one person and we're not tracking that, then we may be losing some value. Okay, sorry.
That's so good. Like this is why everyone's here.
I'm also taking notes.
Yeah.
That is a fundamental problem.
Yeah.
Because like somebody's inbox, because when you get like group accounts, whether it's say it's a project name or go out, whatever, that means there's more people who ignore it. But it doesn't increase the traffic. So
So there was one here. Would it be a great tool for council strategic outcome measures? It sounds like that was kind of going back to what Jonathan was talking about how we relate to those. There's a challenge / opportunity around adoption. Does anybody want to speak more to that? I have a general idea of what this means.
Well, yeah.
I mean, how do you provide technical assistance for folks that are having a version of change, or
how do you incentivize them when it's worth it?
Right.
Instead of just being another thing that they have to do and
the external adoption too. I mean, they have the best tool in the world, but if no one uses it.
Yeah.
So there'll still be people who'll be, how come I didn't know about this? We've got this amazing world-class project tracking tool. I don't use
I think the greatest incentive is always whenever it makes things easier, so that way folks' jobs are easier or more efficient, and it's easier for folks to find what they need. I think it's incumbent that we drive that point home in as many ways as possible.
Can y'all hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, this is Brian. I'm on video. I don't know if it came through or not, but really appreciate the presentation and looking forward to this. I had a lot to do with the team that brought you Capital Projects Explorer, and wanted just to fill in that last comment was very apropos. I think that a lot of the people we've talked with, and this is mainly on capital project side of things, they're like very frustrated that they have to enter data so many times and then it's also not being used. So I always have two things that we talk about, and if you went to the open data forum, it was something that everyone was really interested in, which is I only want to enter the data once, and then if we enter the data, we sure would like it to be used. And that's what, when you're pulled up Capital Project Explorer, that's what we really try to do. All this comes from system of record. As I said at the open data thing, kind of a broken record for the system of record. And we have lots of systems that already keep track of things like finances and things like that, so we can tap into those for existing projects. I think there is a really neat opportunity with this project to tap into the things that don't have existing systems of record for them. Internal projects, things that are just part of normal operating type work that could be really useful for something like this. So anyhow, it looks good, and looking forward to how it comes together.
Thank you, Brian. And I think that's a really interesting point that we need to consider is at least the immediate kind of adoption path. Does that follow with the projects that currently aren't doing much? Like aren't feeding into an E3 or any other enterprise systems? Does this kind of meet a need in an easy to use way for any of those?
To add to the external adoption side of things, getting more people to get involved and actually use the site, I had a social media celebration of milestones as a way to engage people that may be interested in a project and want to see that something is happening. So when something cool happens, having that be possible to share out and get more people checking out the site. Yeah.
Social.
Another opportunity, which I'm sure again you guys have thought of, especially since you have Mateo on board, is that because people are so interested in this, if we do the foundation really well, this would probably be another good one that we can get like civically engaged developers to contribute to heavily. So yeah, it's super awesome.
Yeah.
This is Brian.
Okay, perfect.
Also with that developers, just to kind of put in a plug for the people that did Capital Project Explorer, it's Socrata, which is, I think they're a pretty big open data shop, and they're actually having their May conference here in Austin. They've always had it in Washington, D.C., and they're moving it to Austin because of all the Socrata work that's not only going on with this project, which is Capital Projects, but also the open budget component of this.
Yeah, that's great. And I mean, another thing that we've talked about is in the interviews, it really came out that people are interested in what's the budget and where's the money coming from a particular thing. And again, really good timing that we're looking into this at the same time that Open Budget ATX just launched, which is a pretty sophisticated drill down into the city's budget. And so one thing that we've talked about is what's the connection between those things. We don't want to duplicate the taxonomy of the city's budget to identify funding codes and all of this kind of stuff where things come from. So the initial iteration, what we're thinking right now is it's going to be pretty just free text to say where particular money is coming from. But it would be really great if eventually we get to a point where someone could be, could go from that project to find out what else is being funded from that pot of money, right? Like how much of the fund is this project right here? Is it pennies or is it the land share? Great. We've got a bunch of others. We've got about 25 minutes left. So we've got how will people find the site? So we talked about that earlier. And I'm starting to find some clusters. I think there are some that definitely relate to like the information consumer side, which is like if there's stale data, people aren't going to come.
Yeah.
how are people going to find the site? There are social features to where we can celebrate milestones, engage people in the information. And then there's a piece around the strategic outcomes, which there might be more there. I'm curious if anyone has any more of those. There are pieces around adoption, mainly on the city side, of making this easy to use. Like, will this meet a need for the projects that don't already use some sort of tracking interface? And then there's kind of the city, liaisoning or administration of this, like who wants to raise their hand to be that point of contact, people not wanting to be that in fear of getting inundated. Can people leave questions or comments or things like that? So I've got another one here. Will there be enough resources, people, product, etc., to complete the assignment? Any other comments or questions on that one?
Is that supposed to be about like just doing this project tracking tool, or?
That's a good question.
I wasn't sure if is that what they mean, or do they mean like the projects that are on the project tracking?
Both.
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I see that now.
And then how do we communicate if there is like a stop of work on the project?
How do we communicate if there's a stop work on the project?
Yeah. Or if like you start a project and through discovery realize it's not worth the amount of money that it would cost to do that.
Yeah. One thing that we heard from a couple of people during the interviews was that they particularly are interested in if a project is stalled, then why? Like, what's going on that's blocking the project? Which is interesting. The other piece, Ashley, that you mentioned is around discovery. One thing that we're kind of trying to figure out is that the phases or the steps that projects go through really differs dramatically from team to team, even within departments of the city. One thing that we've been trying to do on all of our projects is make sure that there is a very explicit discovery phase. And in some cases, if a department is doing an RFP, they might do a requirements gathering, which is a version of that, right? And so as we think of what's the right taxonomy to describe where a project is, and is there a way to make that list of stages universal? Like, how do we reflect that stage of research or discovery or requirements gathering when that's not something we do uniformly or consistently across the city? So will people be working on 1+ project?
More than one project.
Yeah. I'm assuming that this means, will, Carolyn Perez in this case be listed on more than one project?
I think that's how they typically do it. I mean, like public works and stuff, they just don't have enough staff for everyone.
Yeah.
Project to be assigned to one person. But it depends on their workload of assigning how many projects to each person.
Just to kind of chime in on the bond site, what was decided is it's mainly PIOs. There's a big presence of PIOs, and so it's department PIOs particularly that are on the site. However, there are a couple of program leads. That's kind of different than Civic. Civic, we went straight with the project manager. There's kind of pros and cons to both. I like the discussion earlier about the fact of we want to be able to document and maybe keep track, even put metrics on how we respond and things like that. So I think from a PIO standpoint, in general, a system that could involve a lot of information and metrics would be something that would be very useful, because that is one of the challenges when we were putting together Project Explorer, how that was to be done.
Thank you. More. So will this tool quickly outgrow the SMART label? Seems useful for all city projects. I think that's a great thing. Yeah, and so the whole, when we mentioned what the initial project set's going to be, the Smart City project inventory, we're not necessarily going there because we want this whole thing to be labeled as like a Smart Cities thing. but just because that's a data set that's already pretty rich that we've got. If it had been some other data set having to do with like bicycle projects or something like that, then that would have been a good candidate.
I feel like almost every project the city undertakes, and in the end, if you look at the definition of what a smart city is, if you are actually following the process of like developing something that's user-centered and delivering to the needs of your residents, like it's all smart because you're doing it in a smart way, and that's really the difference of what it is. I think that's something we've discovered in the smart city analysis as well. Like, it doesn't have to be technology, doesn't have to be related to that in any capacity. It's just, are you actually solving the problems in a methodical way? So, yeah.
So let's try to get through these in rapid fire because I want to switch gears and have y'all help us make sense and prioritize some of these. So will the project tracking tool import data from other systems? So I think it's definitely like a city side challenge. I don't think we've heard that on the board yet. Is there a way to identify projects uniquely throughout all systems? I think that's similar, right? How do we integrate? Mm-hmm. Opportunity to track tech stack project progress.
And right now, but yeah.
Cool. Opportunity to share during Austin Design Week, November 8th-ish. So yeah, some internal opportunities there. Unique ideas for unique project initiatives. So that's okay, cool. What else?
Okay, so I have one related to the data one that you just mentioned, but it's about downloading data. It's control files.
All right, the ability to download data more on the user side. Okay.
And then a couple relating to GitHub, if that is where it will be tracked.
Okay, so how will you handle project management for this GitHub issues? Will you post a release schedule on GitHub so that I know how I can contribute as a non-government person?
Sounds like you need a project tracking tool for your project tracking tool project.
Right? Yeah. This is like, yeah, I think this is bridging, the public involvement of people who are going from consuming the information to wanting to actually contribute to this. This is great. Project Tracker, aka Track City of Austin projects, can be part of austin.gov, organized within a participate in local government theme or similar. So a thought there of how it might integrate with a new austin.gov. Mm-hmm. What was the thing about finding? How do you find it? Perfect. Okay, cool. What else?
These are all things that we talked about already, but okay. You're just sticking.
Cool. While I put these up, do you have some more?
I have a couple other ones. Yeah. Along with the stale data, if you could potentially push data from one of the enterprise systems, that might be a good way to kind of get access to that data. And kind of work with that first as a beta test instead of potentially. One of the other links with the strategic planning initiative is that it's got a really big performance measurement focus. So they're going to be coming out with performance measures each of the 6 teams that they're going to recommend for each of those strategic planning areas. And with that, I think there is an opportunity to kind of have a manageable number of performance measures without kind of the current list of hundreds or thousands that the city currently has.
Yeah.
And that's kind of being tied in with the Office of Performance Measurement.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And kind of a connection point, I think it's important to beta test with like a wide range of projects that the city deals with. Some of them have, tangible outcomes, and some of them don't have tangible outcomes. So how do you go with that in some of your beta testing?
Could you give me an example of 2 extremes?
So the mobility bonds with like a road or something, it's something that you can actually see. If it's something like performance measurement tool, maybe you wouldn't see that as much. It'd be a little bit more abstract. Or what if it's an initiative that provides a service or something that is maybe more difficult to see or showcase, I guess.
It doesn't make the resident happier.
Exactly. So you can do a survey that then gives you some performance measures on the back end, but I think those are some of the 2 extremes that we deal with as a city that provides services and goods.
Yeah. One thing that we heard in the interview reviews from city staff was that we do a really good job of collecting input and output, data on this is how much money went into it, this is how many feet of sidewalk were installed, that kind of thing. But we still don't have a way of measuring like walkability. Like we put this sidewalk in a particular neighborhood in order to give people that amenity and help them, walk. Did we do that?
Well, I mean, I think that gets back to performance measures that actually give us directional call to action for the city.
Yeah.
So like homelessness, like we take an annual count of homelessness, but we don't get at, why are those folks homeless, or what are the things driving that, to know what strategies we should undertake as a city to help move that number. We just know whether it went up or down basically from that number.
Yeah.
Yes, I have a staff from Charles.
All right. So he just dropped them and left?
Yeah.
Drop the mic.
What is our external market? I'm a user.
Okay, cool.
What about all the stuff that is still on paper?
Getting rid of paper.
Yeah.
Like next week, we're not gonna have paper.
Wonderful. Okay, what else?
Projects change a lot.
Projects change a lot over their life cycle. How do we deal with that? Great. Then there was like a section around governance and updating and all that kind of stuff.
Stale
like,
data.
It's, still
data.
Yeah. I think that's good. All right.
What is a project?
What is a project?
What
Yes.
is not?
Yeah, I think that's great. Okay, what else you got?
Redundant systems and places where data is created.
I want to enter the data once.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
What happens when the city looks bad?
What happens when the city looks bad? That's interesting.
Like, oh, they haven't finished this project yet in 5 years.
I think that is an interesting perspective. I'd like to know what he means by that. Like,
There's some interesting, some assumptions under there.
I think it's if you had like a large number of stalled projects,
Yeah.
then there's like an accountability metric there because it's so
Sure.
easy to see and pull that data and say that about the city.
Which leaders are going to make this happen?
Oh, yeah. So will there be enough resources, et cetera? Is this viable?
Yeah, to go back to that last post, it raises the issue of a culture of accepting the idea that we do some things in an effort to see if they work, and if they don't work, it's good that we know, rather than going all in on an idea that, what if we're testing options and one option doesn't go and another does, just the culture of being able to say that something didn't work and that there's something, what is the value that is earned and gained even when what you try doesn't work, is really a mindset shift that encourages people to keep trying on the worker side and trust us on the public side. So part of it will be about how we talk about things not working, because we should encourage people to try, not dissuade people from.
Well, and I think it's great to have that recorded, so that way if somebody comes up with that idea again, we can kind of look back and say, hey, we tried this and that didn't work, so we don't need to try that again.
Or we absolutely have to try it differently.
Or we have to try differently that way too. Sure. Yeah. But having that record, we don't have that record as it stands now, so sometimes we do try things exactly the same way.
So that's the $1 billion idea. That's the whole point of, I guess, trying to achieve utopic euphoria for city government. I mean, when you look at it in general, city government does not operate in that capacity. It's either you do one thing and you're doing it for a year, 2 years, 5 years, 6 years, and then slowly but surely it'll become successful, or it'll just fade by the wayside, and hopefully people will forget. But making that mind shift into, it's a cliche, into the private sector, because it's okay if private sector does 10,000 things and they all fail. You just need one to be successful, and they're like, oh my God, you're a hero because you created X. But no one really saw the hard work and effort behind testing, trying, doing it a different way, failing, having to reinvent. People don't see that. They don't hear that. And you always hear the methodology of what Thomas Edison did. It's like, hey, he tried 10,000 times before the a light bulb actually. Yeah. So I mean, I think that's, to your point, that like I said, that's kind of the utopia of what's trying to be achieved here, and that's what it's always been talked about. It's always been spoken about, but no one has really drew the line in the sand and said, okay, we're going to start at this particular point in time to do that. So to have a record, to have a history, have a creation of it, I mean, it'll be absolutely phenomenal. I mean, whether it works or not, it doesn't matter because at least you're making that initial step. I mean, I can applaud. I hope something to that point does happen where eventually everyone within the city, I mean, even if it's this group here that does this, I mean,
and I think part of the balance there is that one of the differences between government and industry, private industry, is government exists to be dependable and be a cornerstone for everyday expectations that things will work as they should. And private industry can experiment all at once because the basics are accounted for through government. And I think that's part of the reason that as long as government is still operating dependably, as long as the electricity is still on, there should be some room to talk over here on the side about different ways to do electricity delivery, for example, so that we have the dependability and the project tracking. And when something great works, then maybe they phase in. I think you still have to give people what they expect from government.
So,
for sure.
Hopefully somebody recorded all that because you become a heroine if it actually works.
I think that's a goal of this initiative.
Absolutely.
For sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We're going to see how we can do it in a sly way to where it's not staring you at the face saying like, hey, you need to fail fast. But is there a way that we can do it?
But also, why not? You know, just keep that in the back of your mind. Why not? Have that staring in your face saying, fail fast.
All right, so we've got, how do we get the public to actually use this tool? How much will this cost to be maintained over time? So that kind of has to do with the internal maintenance and staffing. What about third-party or non-city data and participants? That's interesting. I think it's similar to like the open source piece. So I'm going to group that over there. What does interactive citizen engagement participation look like? Like defining what are we talking about with engagement and participation? I think that's a good question. Data quality, all of it. Yeah, yes.
I have a related one about data quality of the time it might take for someone to explain the differences if there's overlapping data. Brian.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. It's like the inverse of like the more time it takes, the poorer data quality you have. And then a lot of systems all over the place. Okay, so with the remaining couple of minutes that we have, we're going to do kind of a dot voting kind of thing. What we want is basically for you to just give us your gut impression based on what's up here. What's the most critical thing that we have to do? Whether it's now, it could be in the future. It could have to do with the success of an MVP, or it could have to do with the evolution of this and expansion citywide, maybe. But just wherever it is, don't worry about what the criteria are. Each of one of these little pads has 3 little sticky notes on it, so use these like dots and just apply them anywhere over here. So I'll give you one each. For those that are joining remotely, we will not, the door is not closed on this exercise when we're finished, so we'll take photos and we want feedback from you on what's resonated with you and what really you think that this project needs to address, what's most critical.
Sorry, vote on the group?
Yeah, the group or the individual, idea.
Top 3 almost.
Top 3. And also, feel free to use all 3 on one thing. If there's something that you think makes or breaks this, and should be the singular focus. If you only have one hurdle to jump, you can put all three on the same thing.
I was given extra stickies.
Did I give you 2 pads?
Oh no. I made a donation. I just bullied my way into the process. Part of the exercise.
You're proxy voting. While they're voting, we'll close the video chat here in a minute. But any other questions or comments from anybody joining remotely?
Sorry, I couldn't figure out all the mute buttons I had pushed. This is Brian again, and really appreciate this. I think there's a lot of good things going. I would like to make sure that based on the timeline, we maybe coordinate with a lot of the other initiatives going on, just to make sure that we're not duplicating a lot of existing efforts, and also look at opportunities for coordinating, especially the data and synchronizing it. However, we need to get that to whatever system. I mean, the good thing is there's a lot of data available that is really untapped and not used. And if we can use that data from those existing systems of record, it'll only improve that data, because when people see that the data is being used, they tend to keep it up much better.
That's great.
Great point.
Yeah.
Thank you, Brian. Well, I think we'll go ahead and we'll close in just a second. We'll take photos, but so far there seems to be a couple of big clustering areas here. There are a couple of votes around making sure that this project is resourced and has the right leadership and support to make it viable. There are a couple of pink sticky notes around this systems of record and not duplicating data and connecting with other existing systems, to Brian's point just a moment ago. There are a couple of points around the city staff who are going to be liaison or point on these projects, and a few
on adoption, this challenge of how do we make sure that this thing is adopted with a lot of legacy systems and process. And then there are a couple of votes in some other places, but those seem to be the most salient. Cool. Well, thank you those who joined remotely. We'll take photos and share. And like I said, if you guys have any questions, you can just feel free to email me and I'll share with the team, daniel.honker@Austin, Texas. Thank you very much. .gov.